A kindergartner in Alabama, I'm talking about a 5-year-old, was forced to sign a suicide contract. Now, why the hell did this happen? Well, apparently she had the audacity to pick up a crayon and pretend as though it was a gun, and she went, pew, pew. And so, of course, administrators at the school were alarmed by this because how dare she pick up a crayon? She must be someone who's gonna do a mass shooting on campus, right? And so as a result, they made her sign a suicide contract. Now, I would venture to say that a 5-year-old probably has no freaking idea what suicide is, but now she does. Now, the mom did release a statement about this. She said the following: while I was in the lobby waiting, they had my 5-year-old sign a contract about suicide and homicide. Most of these words on here she's never heard of in her life. This isn't right. She's 5 years old. Now, I think this is another example of a zero tolerance policy, people overreacting to something that kids often do. But I want to hear from you guys. Sandra, make your point.
Yeah, this is absurd. This is the most absurd thing ever. Relating it to my field, which feels weird because we're talking about kindergartners, but people often will fear what they don't understand. And fantasy and play is something that we don't talk about, and the science behind it and why it's important to our survival as a species. And so seeing someone playing and not understanding what that means, it's like fantasy and being like, oh, I have a fantasy that I'm not even going to say anything because everyone's going to start thinking about that. When people go, oh, that means you want to do that in real life and that's terrible. And it's like, no, it's a very different thing. And so kids who play cops and robbers,
it doesn't mean they're going to go out and be cops and robbers.
They're not hoping that they eventually kill their friends.
Right.
And it's very not the case.
Right.
Very not. So,
yeah, Cara, what do you think?
I think that what we're seeing here is something that's kind of a misguided attempt by educators and administrators to do what they think is good. Unfortunately, we in this country are obsessed with preventive measures for crime, and it's very hard for us to sit still with the fact that sometimes bad things happen no matter what you do. So, we're obsessed with take off your shoes when you go through the airport because one time one person had a bomb in their shoe. Not looking at the data that this has actually never prevented another crime from occurring in the airport. And I think the same thing is happening here. They see a certain behavior that in some sort of twisted logic could be a precursor to something. Let's nip it in the bud, let's stop it in its tracks. Look, we did our part to prevent another school shooting. It's very misguided. They're not looking at the data, they're not looking at the science or the evidence. And in some ways, yes, I think that they're actually exposing this child to things that are the parents' responsibility to expose the child to.
I think that's really the biggest problem here. I mean, this 5-year-old is not thinking about suicide and she's not thinking about homicide. This is a clear case of a zero tolerance policy that has gone awry, right? Yes. You have educators and administrators that don't want to use human judgment, so they just resort to a zero tolerance policy to deal with something that might make them a little uncomfortable. Just think instead of have a knee-jerk reaction to something like this. So here's the question. What was one rule your parents were overly strict about? Sandra.
Oh my goodness. So I grew up in the age where kids were getting abducted a lot on the news, meaning that it wasn't actually happening as much as people thought, but they were terrifying parents all over the country. So I wasn't allowed to go outside. They were terrified of me hurting myself just generally, so I had to wear elbow guards and knee guards and helmets. If I wanted to go rollerblading, at least they let me do that. They didn't let me have any power tools or anything if I wanted to build stuff. Like I wanted to do things with my hands. They didn't let me do anything. I was very protected. I will say, however, they were very sex positive in my upbringing that way.
That's awesome.
And the thing about this story that reminds me that it's like saying we can't talk about sex, there's no education around sex because then it's dangerous and you just have to nip it in the bud and say no. And what you need to do is be educating people about violence.
Absolutely.
Instead of just saying no pew pew.
Because the oppression could potentially be breeding more violent behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cara?
So I grew up, weirdly, we grew up in the same era, but I grew up totally playing in the street. Like, the rule was be home by the time the sun sets.
Los Angeles. Where were you?
Plano, Texas.
Right.
There you go. But I did grow up to a Mormon family, if you haven't followed my work, and all the times that I've mentioned this on TYT before. So, what my parents were really strict about was going to church. It was a requirement. I had to go to church every Sunday for 3 hours, every Wednesday night for 2 hours for youth group, and every day before school.
Shut up!
At 6 a.m. That was seminary. It was Bible and Book of Mormon study. And to the extent extent that if one of my friends invited me to go to church with them, let's say I had a Jewish friend who was like, can you come to synagogue? Or I had, a Presbyterian friend, can you come to church with me on Sunday? My parents would only say yes if in return they came to church with me that week. I couldn't miss my own services to go to somebody else. It would have to be on top of all of the church that I was required to.
I didn't realize you had to go to church every day.
Every day.
That's
before
amazing.
School, at 6 a.m.
And devastating.
Yes.
All right. So for me, my mom was strict about almost everything. I was super sheltered growing up, which is why when I went into adulthood, I was naive about a lot of things, but I've come a long way. But the one thing that she was insanely strict about was sleepovers. I never slept over anywhere as a kid, right? So my friends were like, come on, we're having a sleepover, come by. And my mom's like, no. She's like, it is not safe. You do not do that, right? And she was like worried that we were gonna sneak out or cause trouble, whatever. But then as I grew older, I realized, no, she's worried about all the sexual assaults and rapes that she hears about on the news on a regular basis, right? And when we started reporting on those things on TYT, I was like, damn, you know what? When I have kids, I'm probably gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna let my kid go camping. No, I'm not gonna let my kid sleep over the priest's house. No, I'm not gonna let my kid do any of that shit. You know what I mean?
Answer B is correct.
Yes, never at the priest's house.
Absolutely. But we do want to hear from you as well. So go ahead and comment in the section below. Let us know what your parents were overly strict about. Who knows? Maybe your parents were free spirits and they let you do whatever the hell we want. We want to hear from you too. Comment on the story as well, and we will see you guys soon.